You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Max Barry.
Authors. I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web. Before We Ever Spoke by Dan Largent. Cleveland, Ohio, 2006. After a chance encounter, three people soon find out that life can sometimes thrust us into the public eye, even when taking great measures to avoid it. Cooper Madison was the best pitcher in baseball after being drafted number 1 overall in 1996 from the small Gulf Coast town of Pass Christian, Mississippi. 1 year after announcing his sudden and shocking retirement, he finds himself seeking anonymity in Cleveland, Ohio. Kara Knox is the youngest sibling to 3 older brothers. After a tragic work accident to her closest relative, she has built up a tough exterior as she begins her final year of college at Cleveland State University. Jason Knox, Kara's oldest brother, is the lead detective on Cleveland's Edgewater Park killer case. After months without a suspect, he's feeling the heat from his media-hungry chief. Serendipity intervenes, and all three learn that perception and reality are paths that rarely ever intersect. Before We Ever Spoke by Dan Largent. Hey folks, you really ought to check out Patricia Gilliam's Heroes of Corvus series. Book 1 is called A Superhero's Duty. A fight between a second-generation superhero named Red Bolt and a villain for hire named Icarus goes terribly wrong, resulting in the drowning deaths of 3 innocent civilians and orphaning a 6-year-old boy. Racked with guilt, Red Bolt visits Cameron Wilson at the hospital every night and won't leave the boy's side until he falls asleep. Befriended by a night shift nurse, the man in costume begins to disclose what really happened after the fight and why he feels the death of Cameron's parents and sister fall on his actions. A superhero didn't survive that night, and Cameron and the rest of the city are not out of danger. A Superhero's Duty, Book 1 of the Heroes of Corvus by Patricia Gilliam. Get this series now. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Max Barry on the show with me today. He has a phenomenal new science fiction book. It's called Providence. And guys, this is an amazing read for so many reasons. And you definitely need this on your bookshelf right now. Welcome to the show, Max.
Thank you very much.
Max, we begin each show with the same question each time, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Wow, my very first memory. I probably would think of when I was in elementary school, and occasionally I would just take some paper and pencils away and write short stories in this little corner of the playground, which, looking back, is an incredibly antisocial thing to do. But it was something that I've always dreamt of doing. I've wanted to be an author since as long as I can remember, and at some point I realized this wasn't a terribly practical ambition to have, especially in high school, where I realized you can't just go out of high school and become an author and expect to still eat. So I did have to do a few detours. Well, you can't do it straight away. Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, so I did have to take a detour or two. But yeah, I did get there in the end. So yeah, it's definitely my dream job.
Do you remember what the first book that you read, or maybe it was an author that you fell in love with, or a series that lit that fire inside you that said, that made you think, I have to do this?
Gosh, I read so many books. I was really lucky to have parents who were really encouraging of reading and writing when I was growing up. And I read so much different stuff. I loved the Enid Blyton books, which are for kids. She's written so many different classic sort of English, very English stories of children in magical places, the Faraway Tree and that sort of thing. So that was really mind expanding for me. The way that the kids would go to different lands in every chapter was, I guess, this almost like getting a series of short stories featuring the same characters, but you would go to some new place each time, and everything would be different. The rules of the world would be different. So it was almost like every time the kids climbed up the Faraway Tree and went into some new land, it was like a new science fiction story where, okay, now they were in the topsy-turvy land where everyone had to walk upside down, and you would experience this new culture of people who all had to live by these rules. So although as a kid it just seemed like, engaging, interesting situations, looking back at it now, I see them as really quite clever and well-structured science fiction tales where each of these lands has to have its own internal logic, and they have to make perfect sense to the people in them. And yeah, that was a series of stories I fell in love with. I read so much fantasy and science fiction in particular in my youth. So that has really stuck with me. I never really have been tempted to write fantasy as I've gotten older, but I have always wanted to come back and write some sort of classic science fiction or traditional science fiction of the kind that was being written a lot in the 50s and 60s, where it was humans with great warships against hordes of aliens and that sort of thing. So yeah, that sort of stuff has certainly been part of my diet, and I've been looking for a way to come back and tackle that in a slightly more modern way and still keep that sort of the beautiful simplicity of what some of these classic sci-fi tales have, where the themes are not very complicated, but then you get to dive quite deeply into the implications of that theme.
Right. There's something about that science fiction from the 40s, 50s, and into the 60s where, a lot of it was what I like to term kind of hopeful sci-fi, where we're exploring, and it really encouraged and motivated a generation of people to really kick off space exploration, and that's the power of science fiction. It can ignite the world's imagination, and I think that we don't give science fiction enough credit for that sometimes.
Yeah, we're a really curious people, and the idea that there may be amazing things out there that we haven't discovered yet is really intriguing to a lot of us. So science fiction, it comes in various different forms, of course, and I've usually dabbled in the kind of sci-fi that is grounded in the modern world. So it's it's a book that's like if it's Jennifer Government, it's set in modern day, but it's a modern day where it's very ultra libertarian and ultra capitalist. But Providence is the first time I've really gone into the future a couple of hundred years and got out spaceships and aliens and had to play around with them. So it's new for me, but yeah, it's something that is, I think, allows you to tell a story that is surprising and new, because there are no rules about what may happen in there, or at least there's a new set of rules that's completely different to the rules that govern the world we live in. And yet you can hopefully still find a story in there that is very relatable and is involving real people facing the real kinds of dilemmas and making decisions that are relatable to us in our lives today.
Right. When you wrote your first book, you were working for Hewlett-Packard, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. After high school, when I realized I needed to do something that wasn't writing books to earn a living, I ended up I did a Bachelor of Business with a major in marketing, which was my decision to go into something that seemed like it was kind of creative. I could not be writing stories, but if it was something related to advertising, that felt kind of creative to me, but also practical in the sense that people might pay me to do it. And I've also got a geeky side as well, where I've loved programming as a kid. I had a Commodore 64 when I was 9 years old and learned how to actually program a computer and make it do things that you wanted, which is just tremendously inspiring. I really am a bit sad that now kids don't get to have that computer where you have to type to make it do something. Instead, you can just tap the icon and everything loads and runs all by itself. So you don't get that sense that you're in control of the machine. But yeah, I have that side of my personality that is the programming side, that right brain side, I guess. So it was looking for a job that would allow me to do a bit of both. And yeah, I worked for HP for 2 years, wasn't a long time. And it was a good job. I learned a bit about like what workplaces are like and how you have your own little culture and you work in your own corporate bubble where there are ideas about what's right and what's wrong that may be completely alien to anyone outside the company, but they're super important when you're inside the company. And it was great, but I also felt like I was completely wasting my time compared to what I wanted to be doing. And so I had a really crappy car, a 1979 Toyota Corolla, I think, which I ended up selling for $200 when I was done with it. So that's the sort of vehicle that it was. And I would steal away at lunchtime and write a couple of hundred words of my novel. And that really felt like the most important thing I was doing each day. So I know that for other people in the company, it was really rewarding to like hit those sales targets and to do the things that would progress your career in the company. But for me, that felt less important than the words I was writing. And it's always stuck with me. I always feel like the most important part of my day is anytime I'm building something that will stick around. It won't be like a sales quota that maybe I'll hit it, but then a year later the quota rolls back and you start again. The creation process for me is just been really satisfying. And there's nothing I do that is quite as satisfying as creating a piece of fiction, and to a lesser extent, like a web app or something to do with programming. But if I'm building a book and that book is going to be there forever, that feels important to me. And I know that maybe no one will read it in 10 years' time, but it's still the process of creating that book is really gratifying to me. And so it's what was driving me at HP to feel like no matter what else I was doing, I was actually writing this book that luckily enough ended up getting published. So it did actually start my career as an author off. But yeah, just that process of writing a book was the main part of my day.
And that book that came out of that experience was Syrup, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's kind of crazy in retrospect because I was just some 23-year-old working in Melbourne, Australia, and I didn't know how, like, what do you do when you finished a book and how do you get published and become a best-selling author, which is what I desperately wanted. And I used the search engine of the time, Alta Vista, to search. Google wasn't around then. to search how do you get published. And I found all these websites providing advice, which were all American because the web was like 90% American back in 1997. And so I accidentally discovered how you get an agent in the US, like what the process for doing that is. So I wrote a bunch of letters to American agents figuring that, well, it doesn't hurt. I'm just wasting stamps, if nothing else, at the same time as I was trying to get published in Australia. And as it happened, the American system was far more efficient and ruthless than the Australian one. So the Australians would take 6 months to read your stuff and then write you a letter and say, maybe send a few more chapters, maybe do this, maybe do that. Whereas the American agents would reject you in 2 weeks and allow you to move on to the next one. So I went through a bunch of American agents before one of them phoned me up and said that they were interested in representing me. And that was just a breakthrough for me because it meant that instead of being limited to the Australian market, which is very small compared to the American one, it meant that I was suddenly opened up and I was being published in this very large market. And I've been able to write pretty much full-time ever since then, which is just a gift and what I always wanted. So I got that quite early in my career. Almost stumbling into it by accident, but I'm so grateful for that because I've been able to devote my time to it ever since.
Well, since then, you have published a number of novels. Jennifer Government is a notable one, Lexicon, another notable one. And you have explored similar themes in a lot of your books, but you're constantly pushing boundaries and exploring new technologies, new kind of spaces. Is there a method to the madness when a new project comes along, how you decide what topics to tackle, what technologies to use, and that sort of thing?
Well, there's very little method. I do jump around a lot, and I find that's mainly because I just am curious as a person. So I read a lot of different kinds of books, and I'm inspired by different things in those books. So I always have a curiosity to go try a different kind of story than the one I've already done. So which isn't great, like from a career point of view, I've got to say. Like if I was trying to build my Max Barry brand, I would do the same kind of book. I would stick to a much narrower set of parameters because then people could associate me with a particular type of book, and the people who like that book would know that they could rely on it. So I think I'm slightly less reliable than is ideal for an author. But yeah, I have similar themes that I tend to touch on, but the types of stories are all quite different. So Syrup is a comedy / satire about the marketing industry. And it's probably the least sci-fi of all my books. Although someone said once that it's not a sci-fi book, but you can tell it was written by someone who likes sci-fi, which I really liked. And all the others are pretty much sci-fi. Actually, no, Company is a corporate satire again. That's not satire, not sci-fi either. But the others, are all sort of science fiction, at least in the sense that they may be set in the modern world, but it's the modern world with a twist. There's something a little bit different about it. So if it's Jennifer Government, it's the current world, but it's ruled by American corporations. It's ultra capitalist, slightly more so than is true in reality. So that's been the sort of thing that I've done. With Providence, I saw a chance to kind of dive into that classic 1950s style sci-fi and tell the story that I loved as a kid, and actually go to tell that sort of real space opera type story that I hadn't done before. And I don't think I will do that again. I think that I've done that once, and I will probably go on to something different next. But yeah, it's for me, it's very much a process of just writing things that I find interesting and then exploring them until it starts to develop some sort of shape. So it's literally a process of me having a thought that seems interesting and then writing a scene and having a look at it and thinking, okay, what about this, if anything, is interesting? And that's, it's not a very structured way to go about it. I do find I'm getting more structured later in the process. So I used to be the sort of writer who would just do that the whole time. I would just organically discover the book one chapter at a time. And it's a great method for staying true to the type of the story that you're writing, and to trust your characters to take you somewhere, to trust your instincts to take you somewhere interesting. But it also does tend to lead you to writing a first draft where you've got to throw out the second half and redo it, because it just, the structure of the book is not there. So now I find that with Providence, I probably planned it more than I've planned any book before, where once I had found the core of the story and the most interesting part of it, and I started to figure out who the people were and why they were there and where they'd come from, I could then start to think about the book in broader terms and think about, all right, so where will this end? What's our arc? And I haven't really done that before. I've usually done a more organic process. And so that was really satisfying in that I could write the ending that I'd had in mind pretty much from the beginning, which is something I haven't done before. And so I think if I can continue to strike that sort of balance where the germ of the idea just comes out of wherever they come from, I don't know, but wherever the idea starts, and then I explore it, just pursuing my own curiosity until it starts to feel solid and interesting. And then only once there's a certain amount of quality in that initial idea, then I can start to think about, okay, if it's a book, what sort of structure should it have? What should be the general journey that we go on?
Your books tend to have very fascinating characters, and your dialogue really stands out and really drives the narrative. How do you go about discovering your characters, who they are, and do characters come pretty early in that process when you talked about having that little germ of an idea and starting to write a scene? Do your characters establish themselves pretty quickly?
That's a good question. Thank you for your comment about dialogue. I really do love dialogue myself. I love it in print. I love it in movies and TV. So
it shows.
I've always paid attention to that, and I've gotten so much joy out of little exchanges of dialogue in real life, in fiction. So I have always just been drawn to that myself. The character development, it's something that doesn't really stop. I started off with an idea for some people in this particular situation. So in Providence, there are these 4 people who are on this battleship, and they are inside a ship that is run by technology, and they don't really have the ability to know exactly what the technology is doing, what the computer is really doing, because it can't communicate with them. They know that it's very good at its job, and that, for example, it's useless for humans to try to aim at the enemy and fire the guns, because humans are so bad at that compared to computers. So there's a certain amount of trust, but also mystery about what the ship itself is up to. So I was interested in that situation, and as I explored that, the characters emerged. But there's really no process where suddenly I was like, okay, well, that character's done. There's always discovering more and more about them. And I would go back. This happens with every book. I'll often have the characters in the start of the book, and they will seem, by the time I get to the end and go back and reread it, I'll think, boy, these characters just seem terrible compared to where they ended up. And so I've discovered so much more about them over the journey of writing that book that I have to go and fix all these things at the start that don't work anymore. So it's that sort of thing. Also, one of the things that happens when you have quite an organic process of discovering the book is you end up with people doing things, and then you think about, oh, why did they do that? So I had that with Providence, where I had some exploratory writings, and I had some characters making a particular decision, and I didn't know why they had done that at the time. So it was then I would think about, okay, what must have happened to put these people in this situation? And so I figured out some things about the characters, and then when it was time to actually go back and write the beginning of the story, that I understood then where they were coming from.
The new book Providence has a really interesting narrative style, one that is seldom encountered. Talk a little bit about your choice to open the book this way, and the unique way that we get into the character's head.
You're talking about the first chapter?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So the first chapter is a second-person chapter. So it refers to you, the reader, and it refers to what the reader is doing. And it was a chapter that I had written, again, in part of this discovery process of the book, where at first, in fact, the whole book, when I wrote the first draft, or at least I wrote the first draft up to maybe like 40,000 words, it was a first-person narrative from the perspective of the character Gilly. Now, where we wound up is a book that is third-person, told from 4 different perspectives. And Gilly is one of the main characters, but he's by no means the only one. So, yeah, I had tried a lot of different things as I was discovering the story and figuring out where the interesting part of it was. And one of the things that came out of that process was this chapter that was a second-person perspective of, and it reveals how humanity first encountered this alien species that turns out to be tremendously hostile. And it was a chapter I had thought would go in the middle of the book somewhere, where I wanted to drop you straight into the action. So you've got these people on a ship, we're watching them fight a war, and everything seems nice and simple, and there are good guys and there are bad aliens, and that's it. And then I would add this chapter that sort of explained or revealed about the first contact later on. And in that way, it would actually help you understand the perspective of one of the characters who is very, very hostile to the aliens herself. But then, yeah, as I was moving things around and figuring out what the actual story I was trying to tell was, I realized that had to be the opening of the book. It had to be the first thing that you encountered as a reader, where you are encountering the aliens through the eyes of all of these people. So there's a first contact video that is explained in the first chapter, and you, the reader, are watching that video and seeing what everyone on Earth is aware of now, which is what happened when we encountered the aliens. And it's, it puts you in the shoes of the characters in a way that a different style wouldn't quite have done. So yeah, that just worked for me. I've written in a variety of styles before. I just for the intellectual curiosity, I guess, of doing it. One of my novels is told in present tense, and that was really interesting just to figure out the feelings it conveys to you as the reader. And that's what this is really all about. I mean, all we're doing as authors is just putting words on a page in order to try to evoke particular feelings and reactions in people's brains. So the second person perspective or point of view just really worked for that for me. The rest of the book is not like that, with one exception. But yeah, it's just the way that felt most natural and most immersive to start the book.
Well, it's really fun too, because like I said, you almost never encounter that narrative style, and it's really shocking a little bit in a way that makes you go, man, what is Max doing here? I've got to keep reading to find out, because it's a really ingenious setup. I love the way you did that. You've mentioned the aliens a few times that we encounter in the book. Tell me about the salamanders and how they came to be.
Right. Well, the salamanders, which is what the people in the book refer to the aliens as, are, as far as we know from the beginning, they are this quite mysterious race of creatures. They're quite animalistic. They're not able to communicate with us. We know that they are very aggressive, that they are able to spit tiny little black holes that basically pull other matter into them. So it's a tremendously damaging weapon that they all have. And the question of exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it is something that's explored quite slowly in the book. All we need to know at the beginning is that they are the bad guys and that they attacked us, and therefore they have provoked this tremendous response from humanity. So it was interesting for me to look at it that way, because the interesting part of the book to me was the situation that these four people find themselves in, and the what brought them there and where they're going and how they're going to respond to these particular problems that crop up during the book. The enemy itself is of interest to one of the characters in particular who wants to understand them better. But because we don't have a whole lot of facts about them, what happens is the characters have to imagine or project their own theories about what's happening and why, what motivates them onto these creatures. And to a degree, the same thing happens with the ship itself, where they're inside this ship that's run by an artificial intelligence that doesn't speak. And so they don't have the ability to really communicate with it and to understand exactly why it's making the decisions it's making. And that leads them to project their own theories onto it. And what that does is it reveals a lot about the people who are doing the projecting. So when you're reading the point of view of the character Gilly, and he has, for example, a very scientific curiosity about the salamanders, and he has a very simple view of the AI in that it's a machine and it's unknowable, but it will reach the right outcome if allowed to do its job. Whereas another character, so Beanfield, who is the life officer of the ship, and her main job is to make sure that the other three people on board are mentally healthy and staying socially productive, because they're isolated for 4 years. They're out in space with no contact with Earth except in very small sync windows. So she has a much more emotive view of both the creatures and of the ship, and she tends to ascribe more human motivations and feelings to those things. So yeah, I liked the idea of not being too distracted in this book by the question of exactly who the enemy was and who the ship was until the right time. So those are questions that are raised quite early, or actually not even raised. They're really just things that are assumed in the beginning. We assume that the aliens are bad and hostile for some natural reason, and the ship is benevolent and doing its job. And as the story progresses, we sort of get to question that a little bit more and find out more about it. But in the meantime, it's about the four people and them attempting to place their own answers onto those questions.
Well, the book is called Providence. It's out, available everywhere now. It's Kindle edition and audiobook. While, if you're sheltering at home like most of us are and can't get to a bookstore because the bookstores probably aren't open anyway,
right.
You can, the Audible audiobook, I'll tell you what, I've been listening to it. It is absolutely phenomenal, narrated by Brittany Presley. Go grab a copy of that, or the Kindle, and all the money you're saving in gas, save up to buy the hardcover when everyone gets back to normal. Max, I know you've got to run to another interview. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today. Is there a place where people can connect with you online if they want to dig into your back catalog and all that good stuff?
Yeah, thank you, Hank. I'm at maxbarry.com, and you can also find me on Twitter and Facebook. But those links are on my website. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks, Max.